So with that, got the housekeeping out of the way. I'd like to go ahead and introduce our distinguished speakers for the day. Eileen Butler is a Planner 4 with the Special Services section within the Division of Waste and Hazardous Substances in Delaware's Department of Natural Resources and Environmental Control. She has a master's degree in marine policy and 27 years of experience working in the environmental field. Eileen has worked within the department since 2005 and has been involved in the world of underground storage tanks for the past year. David A. Gilden is an Environmental Scientist 3 with the Delaware Department of Natural Resources and Environmental Control. Mr. Gilden's career includes more than 15 years working as an environmental consultant, chemist, and laboratory manager in the private sector, where he was involved in a wide array of projects focused on environmental regulations and guidelines for air, water, and soil contamination. Prior to joining DENREC, Mr. Gilden established and operated an indoor air quality consulting firm for 7 years, providing assessment and remediation solutions for residential and business clientele. Mr. Gilden joined DENREC's tank management section in 2014, where he is a project manager responsible for underground storage tank compliance. He's currently a lead instructor for the state's AB operator training program and actively works in planning and managing projects for the state LEAD program. Mr. Gilden earned his Bachelor's of Science in Biology and Chemistry from the University of Delaware in 1997 and an MBA from Goldie Beacom College in 2004. Melissa Wright has been with the Maryland Department of Environmental Control program for 10 years. She is the head of certification section. Among many things, the certification section reviews the incoming third-party inspection reports, including financial responsibility documentation for underground storage tanks containing petroleum products. Melissa has a master's in public health and environmental and occupational health from Drexel University in Philadelphia. And finally, Kelly Adams is a 16-year veteran with the Georgia Environmental Protection Division, mostly with the underground storage tank program. His responsibilities in his current position include the oversight of Georgia UST fund cleanups, fiscal management of the Georgia UST Trust Fund, and policy development for the UST program. Prior to his current position, he was manager of the mining unit for 3 years and a project geologist for 10 years overseeing petroleum cleanups across Georgia. Kelly is a professional geologist and is a graduate of Georgia State University with a Bachelor's of Science degree in geology and an MPA in public policy. Everyone please help me in electronically giving a round of applause to our distinguished panel today. I'm so happy to have these folks here to present. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and hand it off. Before I do, provide a quick overview. Our speakers will do a better job than me in getting into the details. But today we're going to hear from, as you heard, 3 different states, and they're going to be discussing a brief overview of FR in their state, verification of FR mechanisms, including approaches, challenges, and outreach efforts, and interpretation of FR policies in the field. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and hand it off to our first speaker, Eileen Butler. And Eileen, you should have the controls now.
We're looking. Great.
Okay, go.
Good afternoon, everyone. Today, my name's David Gilden, and I'm with Eileen here. We're both going to tag team this. Today, we're going to be talking about Delaware's requirements for financial responsibility and the inspector's approach to verifying proper financial responsibility. Eileen's going to speak about the intricacies and concerns of FR, and I'll be talking about the inspector's approach to confirming FR in the field and in the office.
Okay, so what does financial responsibility look like in the state of Delaware? Let's take a look at the regulatory requirements. Financial responsibility, or FR, has to be in place prior to any regulated substance going into the UST system. Delaware is in the midst of updating our regulations. We plan to have them finalized by November of 2019. So after November, if the owner or operator does not have FR in place, it will warrant an immediate delivery and dispensing prohibition.
Financial responsibility covers costs encountered from an accidental release of underground storage tank. It covers corrective action in order to bring the affected area back to an acceptable environmental standard. And it also covers compensation of third parties for both property damage and for bodily injury. In Delaware, as most other places, facilities are required to carry a per occurrence amount and an annual aggregate. The per occurrence amount is the maximum amount of monies allotted per incident, and the annual aggregate is the total amount the policy will pay out per year. So if the per occurrence amount is used up in one incident, the site is then responsible for the remaining money. Per occurrence requirement is based on the amount of monthly throughput for the facility. So less than 10,000 gallons a month throughput is $500,000 requirement, and 10,000 gallons or greater is then $1 million requirement. The annual aggregate is based on the number of tanks under the policy. So up to 100 tanks in Delaware is $1 million requirement, and greater than 100 underground storage tanks is then $2 million. And as a point of reference, in Delaware, more than half the facilities hold a $1 million per occurrence and then a $2 million annual aggregate amount.
There are a number of financial responsibility mechanisms to choose from when complying with federal and state law. Delaware has a few owners that use surety bonds and self-insurance, but a majority of our owners and operators utilize pollution liability insurance to establish their FR to come into compliance with the regulations. There are two types of policies, confirmed and suspected release policies. Confirmed release policies are less expensive, they're more numerous, and they only cover costs associated with the release. Suspected release policies involve costs associated with the investigation to determine if there actually has been a release. So who's involved in the world of insurance? You have the insurance company or insurer that provides the policy and pays the claim. The agent works with the owner and the insurance company to identify the right policy for the owner. And the surplus lines producer provides insurance that is able to accept higher risk. Most tank policies involve surplus lines.
So now let's go through how the inspector verifies acceptable FR during the inspection process in Delaware. So in Delaware, first we have some weird situations that can occur, and one of those is where the owner and operator can be two separate entities. So if the property is owned by one entity and then leased out to another, the operator, there's two people that could carry the FR. Both parties are liable for the release, and that's how it is in Delaware. However, only one is required to maintain FR. We don't specify who that person is. Just one of the people has to carry FR of those two. We do require that the owner and operators maintain evidence of historical coverage of FR throughout the ownership. So when verifying FR in Delaware, the inspector is going to look for two specific forms. Form D is a certificate of insurance, and the other form is a Form R or a Schedule R, which is a list of all the underground storage tanks covered. It's also known as a tank schedule. And Form D, also known as a certificate of insurance, it has to match Delaware's Department of Natural Resources and Environmental Control's wording exactly. This way we know that the insurance company agrees with all of our requirements. It will include amount and scope of coverage, required first dollar coverage, meaning the insurance company has to pay before the deductible is collected from the insured, a 60-day cancellation notice, and an extended reporting period, also called a 6-month tail. We'll discuss more later. And Form R is the underground storage tank schedule that lists what is being covered for underground storage tank perspective. And this form will include the unique DENREC facility ID that we assign, the type of financial responsibility mechanism being used, the owner and the operator information, the facility information, and then details of the underground storage tank systems covered, including a tank ID as listed on our registration form for DENREC, the tank's capacity, and the regulated substance that is stored. And while we're out doing a compliance inspection, the compliance inspector will ask for current proof of FR. If the proof is not available at that time, it will be requested in an RFI letter, which is a request for information letter that goes out to the facility after our inspection. Per our upcoming regulations that are about to be promulgated, if the owner specifies they do not have FR, or we know for a fact that they do not, the inspector will now be able to place an immediate reg tag delivery on both delivery and dispensing prohibition for the facility.
Okay, so we have to remember that insurance is a contract between the owner and the insurance company. The regulator in Delaware is here to help the owner comply with the regulations. That also means we help inform the owner about their policy, and the only way to do that is to require that the policy be submitted to us annually, in addition to the submission of Form R and Form D. Now, if you remember, we currently review Forms R and D once every 3 years. So this is going to be a big change once our new regulations come into effect. The owner may not know that they need to notify the insurance company when they plan to change the substance stored, for example, or perform an upgrade. The only way we can know this is by reviewing the policy and assisting the owner in this review when appropriate. The inspector is also an ambassador and can, for example, remind the owner that if they plan to make any changes to their UST, for an example, they're required to notify the insurance company if such notification is in their policy. So an annual submittal will be helpful to make sure the owner is in compliance with the requirements associated with FR, the contract in that policy. And again, if they are not in compliance after November of 2019, which we've said before, we will be able to respond with an immediate delivery and dispensing prohibition. We have always required the insured, that is the owner, notify the department if their policy is canceled or not renewed. But now we are requiring the insurer, that is the insurance company, to notify us as well. Our thought is that if all are required to notify the department, hopefully somebody will. Then we can contact the owner to determine what their plans are to remain in compliance with FR.
So some challenges we foresee going forward in implementing new FR policies for verification are twofold. First, we need outreach and education to owners and operators so they understand the requirements. And we're going to implement that through workshops that are being created and going to be laid out with our new regulation promulgation. And then secondly, we need to ensure that our inspectors know what is expected and how to go about it. And in order to accomplish that, we're working with them in training, and we're developing a checklist for our inspectors to follow. And we're also going to assign a staff person, one staff person, that's in charge of reviewing all complete policies every year annually. In Delaware, we have some interesting situations that we have encountered in the past that we've learned from. We had a situation where a separate owner and separate operator, so there was a different owner and operator for facility, and the operator left the site without the owner knowing. The operator had held the previous FR policy, and that lapsed before the owner discovered that the operator had left. And that left the lapse in coverage, which created a difficulty in the owner obtaining a new policy for FR. Another situation, we had an operator that stopped pumping product to the public in anticipation of closing and removing his tanks, and he canceled FR. His tanks were 30-plus years old. they had releases over time from spill buckets and things, but he had such a large deductible, he figured he could cancel his policy and save money by not renewing, and assumed that he would be able to cover any minimal costs of contamination since he thought his deductible was so high. Didn't realize how expensive contamination costs could be, and just assumed that his deductible would be high enough that it wouldn't be worth covering if he had a release, which he didn't think he did. He ended up being lucky. The contamination was minimal because his tanks weren't removed until shortly after his 6-month tail had expired, and he hadn't properly notified his insurance company of the status of his tanks either.
Okay, so we've, as you can imagine, possibly, we've gotten a lot of pushback from our inspectors about reviewing the insurance policy. They think it's overwhelming and time-consuming, so we hope that with the checklist, this necessary task for review will be manageable. The declaration page on the policy provides a comprehensive summary of what is actually in the policy. Take a close look at that page that highlights the exclusions to the policy coverage. We'll go into that a bit later, but certain exclusions are not permitted in the policy, and you want to make sure that language is not included in the policy. Federal law requires each policy include what Dave stated was identified as a 6-month tail. It is the time an owner has to report a release that occurred during the period that the policy was in effect. Now, an owner can purchase a longer reporting period, but a 6-month extended reporting period is required.
So some items included in the checklist that we're creating for our inspectors are, they're to ensure a lot of these items that Form D language is met and that the insurer is meeting what we're requiring. Most of these items on this list will be covered by that. Some other items that are also on this list, the tank schedule, the inspector needs to make sure the tank schedule, Form R, that the tanks listed in the policy match that schedule, and also that it matches our database so that the tanks are correct. And the amount of per occurrence and the annual aggregate, that they are acceptable, and that there's no exclusionary language that's not allowed. So Eileen's going to talk some more about the exclusionary language concerns now.
Thank you, David. So as indicated in the last slide, David said that it is important to make sure that unacceptable exclusions are not included in the policy. In Delaware's regulations that will be promulgated in November, we have inserted language stating that any exclusionary language indicating that cleanup costs associated with voluntary tank removals or voluntary site investigations will not be covered. This is not acceptable. So the EPA clarified its stance on such exclusionary language, and if such language is found in a policy, it no longer meets the criteria for an FR mechanism. We have included some samples of what that language may look like in a policy. And as you can see here, they can be quite clever. But the results are the same: an FR mechanism that is ineffective and not compliant. Okay, so now we're going to get a little bit into the weeds. A self-insured retention is the dollar amount an owner must pay before the insurance policy starts paying on a claim. So under a self-insured retention policy, an owner pays the cleanup, third-party damage and legal costs until the total amount of the retention limit is reached. Only after that point does the insurance provider pay for costs covered by the policy. So, for example, if you have a $1 million policy with $100,000 self-insured retention, an owner pays the $100,000 first, and then the insurance company starts paying under the $1 million policy. If the owner does not or cannot pay the self-insured retention amount, the insurance coverage is not then activated. Now, this is different from a deductible in that the deductible is part of the policy coverage limit. The federal UST regulation requires insurance providers pay first dollar coverage for deductibles without waiting for the insured to pay that amount. This is very important. The insurance provider may then collect the deductible from the owner, but the corrective action is not delayed. An owner can use a self-insured retention if it is applied to the time before the start date of the policy, going back to the retroactive date of the policy. So this is really confusing. The take-home message here is, if the owner is using a self-insured retention, know where it is being applied in the policy. So in Delaware, an owner no longer needs to maintain FR if the tank is removed or closed in place and after November of 2019 when the tank is rendered empty. There are a number of issues that surrounding the use of insurance, especially as it relates to aging tanks. Owners are dealing with higher premiums or are not having their insurance renewed and finding it difficult to purchase insurance because of the age of the tank. New issues come up all the time due to the creative exclusionary language insurance companies use to minimize their liability. Self-insured retentions can complicate matters, and new technologies to extend the life of the tank will likely impact future insurance policies. So should you want to delve into the world of FR, the EPA has a great reference manual that reviews all acceptable FR mechanisms. ASWAMO has provided an informative guide to tank insurance, and there are many Lustline articles on FR, and the link here will take you to an article on the basics of insurance. So thank you for listening.
Please feel free to contact us at the emails listed on your screen if you have any questions or any way we can help. And if anyone has questions, we'll give it back to Drew and handle it from there. Thank you.
Thank you.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you so much, David and Eileen. And I did get a couple of questions there. And I know one of the things that we discussed in planning this webinar was, I do plan to post these slides along with the recording to the archive. So I got a couple of questions just about those logistics. And I think one of the things we can look at too is David and Eileen provided some really good links there on their second to last page. So you can revisit that PDF when I post it and make sure that those links are actually clickable, because I know at least some of those NEIWPCC links are kind of long for you to jot down. So I want to make sure that those are clickable. So yeah, just to answer those questions, the slides and the recording will be posted online to the archive. So a couple of questions for the panel, and one is just a yes or no. Someone was interested in seeing a copy of Form R, and I wonder if we can talk offline, but if it's something that you all can, if it's okay to make that available, I'm happy to take that from you and sort of post it to the archive along with your slides, if that would be okay.
That certainly is possible. Yes, we can do that.
Okay, excellent. So the other question, maybe a little more specific here. So someone was curious as to, are all the exclusions and the SIR items found on the declarations page?
They're on an exclusions page. Like usually as you go through the policy, the declarations page is like the front page. So as you go through the policy, it'll say exclusion, and it's very clear. It'll give you exactly what the exclusion is. So it won't be hidden, within the policy.
Sure. Great. And I had another one. A couple just came in, so feel free to keep firing away, folks. So the next question, do you require that the department is listed as the certificate holder?
Question.
Certificate of insurance? No. No, we do not.
Okay. And then another one here is, are you addressing the load/unload exclusion in colony insurance policies?
That's a great question. We believe, I'm following that issue, but with regards to loading and unloading, it is part of the FR requirement. They have to have insurance for that. And when we believe that's the owner's responsibility.
Okay.
But that is a big issue that's unfolding right now. So.
Okay. Well, thank you, whoever sent that good question. Then, and if if our panel today kind of answers your question, and you want to have a follow-up question, feel free to kind of send it back to me. So I'm gonna take another one here that I just got. So the question is, did Delaware work with their Attorney General to accept surety bonds and guarantees? And if so, how does that process work?
So we have to get approval from our DAG before we can accept those bonds. We have to get them to approve, and there's a process in our regulations that provides how that's supposed to function.
Okay, great. So I'm going to give it just maybe 30 more seconds if anyone wants to send another question. And again, as the questions come in, as we move on through the panel today, I'll still table those questions. So feel free to send at any time, but I'll give it another 20 seconds or so just to see if there's any follow-up questions or new questions for David, Eileen, before we switch speakers. Okay, so I've got one more here. This one's a little longer, so bear with me as I read it out. First, thumbs up from this question. They said a great presentation. So the question is, how does the state coordinate testing of the tank system if the owner-operator is not allowed to place fuel into the tank before they have coverage? And then sort of the follow-up question, does Delaware have insured installers who have insurance to cover the fuel placed into the tank to test?
I can answer the first one.
Okay.
Drew. So there are insurance companies that will allow the coverage, for the testing purposes to make sure that it's liquid tight. I understand what you're saying about the, prior to any regulated substance going in. If they want to use gasoline and not water, we work with the insurance companies to make sure that they're covered for that testing.
They have to be covered before they put any product in the tank.
Yeah, but they want to know if it's for testing purposes to make sure. Am I correct in that, Drew? The first question?
Yep.
Yeah. So we work with the insurance companies to make sure that that they're covered while that testing is going on.
Okay.
And what was the second question?
Yeah, I know that was a lot. So the second one related was, does Delaware have insured installers who have insurance to cover the fuel placed into the tank to test?
I believe it's the owner there. The owner still, I don't know about the testers, if they're insured for that. The owners aren't. They have to have their FR policy in place before the product's placed in the tank. So I'm assuming, I don't know if the testers as well will have insurance, but the owner is going to have to. And I'm not 100% sure, but assuming that would cover any testing. I mean, it's going to cover release, so.
Okay.
That answer.
We're not really sure, as you can tell, but I will say that any business has to have business insurance. So I would think somehow or other it's covered, but I can't answer that definitively. So you trumped us.
So maybe one more a quick one to answer before we move on. So someone's asking about the definition for rendered empty. What does that mean for a tank?
So for Delaware, we have a definition. I think it's 0.2. It's like an inch of regulated substance in the tank, and then there's like a per volume, like 0.003 or some very low volume depending on the tank size. But it's a specific measurable amount. It's
1 inch or less of product, and then I don't remember the percent of volume on the tank, whichever is less.
Okay. Great. All right, well, everyone in the audience, thanks so much for the great questions. And again, thanks so much, David and Eileen. Great way to start the training off here. Everyone out there, these two speakers, their emails are up on the screen there, as you can see, first, last, and Delaware.gov. I'll also post those up again on the last slide if you didn't get a chance to write it down. But great job, folks. Great questions from the audience, and let's keep things moving right along. So I'd like to go ahead and hand it off to our next speaker, Melissa Wright, and she's with the Maryland Department of the Environment, the Oil Control Program. I'll go ahead and hand it off to you, Melissa. All right, you should have the controls right about now. All right, so we can see your intro slide there, Melissa, and it looks like you're still on mute there.
Okay, I think you can hear me now.
Yep, hello. Take it away.
I am Melissa Wright. I'm going to talk about financial responsibility in the state of Maryland. Some of the things I'll talk about is the background, what we require, the history of our financial responsibility reviews. We have a heating oil reimbursement program I'm just going to talk a little bit about because that's the closest thing we have even related to a state fund. Documentation review, how we review the FRs that we do get in, and then how we obtain FR if they don't have it or if they need something corrected, so that's kind of our outreach. I have a few numbers on the types of FR and compliance we have in the state of Maryland, and then enforcement actions, steps that we take if they are out of compliance. And then finally, we have a policy review we've been doing in response to the EPA memo in reference to those voluntary exclusions in the SIRs. So starting with the background, we have the Code of Maryland regulation that incorporates the 40 CFR 280 in regards to financial responsibility. And with that, we incorporated all except for 3 exceptions, and some of the exceptions have to deal with the language so that we make sure that it's the Secretary of the Environment or the state of Maryland that's being included in that and not the EPA or the director of the EPA. But the biggest one that we kind of concern ourselves in these reviews is the last one, where we require that it's solely the owner that obtains the financial responsibility for these tanks and not the operator. And lastly, we do require that they have that financial responsibility until the tanks are properly closed by removal or if they're approved to be abandoned in place. We have 2 ways that financial responsibility is submitted to us. One is to meet the EPA inspection regulations. We have a third-party program, which my section reviews. So it involves certified individuals that perform the inspections that are required, and then they get submitted to us. And with those, the financial responsibility is attached to that for the review. Many times, some of the larger multi-facility owners will submit their financial responsibility insurance documents, and then we can save that once it's approved and review and approved. We can save that and use that for any other of their facilities that may have been due for the inspection during that policy period. The other way that we receive it is many times it's mostly with financial responsibility that is not insurance, like local government bonds or self-insurance or letter of credit. A lot of times those companies or owners will submit to us to review annually to make sure that they're covered. The review of financial responsibility has changed since I first started this 10 years ago. Initially, our financial responsibility expert would review any of the FRs that was not insurance, like the letter of credits, the self-insurance, the local government bonds. And then once that was approved, they would file it for future reference for us to use. And then at times, an insurance policy would be provided to him to perform a more technical review to ensure that the wording and the policy meets all requirements. And then the other thing that would happen, the certification section, which I was in at the time before I was the head, we would always confirm that there was financial responsibility, but we didn't necessarily look for that exact 40 CFR wording in that endorsement or the certificate of insurance. We would kind of have a checklist of things that we're looking for, like the signature of the authorized representative, the owner name, a facility address, numbers of tanks, policy number, the monetary coverage amount, and the policy period, but we weren't concerned that it was all inside of a certificate of insurance. We could have a declaration page that had many of that information on, attached with the tank schedule, and then some random page that had an authorized representative signature, and we would accept that at that point. Then the FR person retired and I became the new FR expert, and my process of reviewing changed at that time because I became responsible for reviewing FRs that are not insurance. Then I had the 40 CFR and other tools that I'm going to talk about soon in front of me so that I can learn those requirements. During this learning process, it became clear that we should be looking for those certificates of insurances or endorsements with the correct language and make sure that they match that language. Our current process is that all financial responsibility that is not insurance is currently reviewed by me. So that's, again, the self-insured, the local government bond rating. I review those to make sure the wording meets the requirements, to make sure that, again, because we require that it's the owner that has the financial responsibility on the system, so I make sure that the registered owner is listed as the responsible party. And if any of the facilities' addresses, they need to match. If there's any tank system information in these different financial responsibilities, we make sure they match what is registered in our database. And then also our compliance field staff and the certification section are trained to review specifically the endorsements and the certificate of insurances worded as required by 40 CFR. If any time they're unsure if it is correct, they can come to me and I can confirm. So now all financial responsibility, including insurance, is reviewed to ensure it meets the wording requirements of 40 CFR. And in the past the wording for certificate of insurances or endorsements was only confirmed if the financial responsibility expert did a technical review. So there's a big difference now. Very quickly, we have a heating oil reimbursement program that is used to reimburse owners of heating oil tanks, whether it's above ground or underground, for eligible spill cleanup. With that, there's a maximum of $20,000 with a $500 deductible. Owners have to apply for this reimbursement within 6 months after completion. They have to show invoices and proof of payment. But at this time, there is currently a significant wait time for up to several years for applicants to receive reimbursement. So that's just has nothing to do with federally regulated tanks. That's just something we have offered for those heating oil tanks. Now, when we do get the financial responsibility, this is going to be about how we review that. So if we get an insurance policy in or insurance certificate of insurance, the first thing we do is we check the Maryland Insurance Administration search tool to determine if that company is currently licensed to conduct insurance business in the state of Maryland. And then we're looking to see that the wording of the certificate of insurance, endorsement, letter from the CFO, depending on which financial responsibility is being reviewed, we need to see that that matches what's required by 40 CFR. We're also checking for that owner name, making sure that the owner name matches what is the name of the insured. Or if it doesn't, is there an additional insured endorsement that includes that owner name? That would be acceptable as well. We're looking for that facility address to match what we have registered, and we need that to match exactly. So if the zip code's different, even though it's the same city name, we need to see that that zip code matches. And we also look to see if the tank system information matches. So if we do get a tank schedule that has a lot of tank system information, but it doesn't match our database, then we need to figure out what the correct information is and make sure that they both match. This is one of the tools that we use. This is provided to all of our third-party inspectors and our Maryland field inspectors, the MDE field inspectors, so that they can understand the basics of financial responsibility requirements. This is a tool that I used a lot when I was learning those requirements of financial responsibility. It does help by breaking down each type into what you need to know to ensure the financial responsibility meets requirements. It provided me a better understanding of what I'm reviewing and how it all works. That was the Underground Storage Tanks Reference Manual by the EPA. The next tool that we have is the Maryland Financial Responsibility Checklist, more geared towards insurance policies or insurance certificate of insurances. this is provided also to all the certified inspectors and then also our Maryland field inspectors when they do look for those insurance policies or certificate of insurances and endorsements. They have this checklist to go through, making sure that they're looking for the insurance company name, the date the policy period is listed and that it's current, that the facility address matches, the owner is listed as the name of the insured or additional insured, making sure there's correct monetary coverage for their pollution liability and that it's actually a policy and not a quote or something, that there's the number of tanks at the facility, and that's correct, that there's a signature of the authorized representative of an insurance company, and in the end, basically that it meets the 40 CFR wording. The next one is an example of a certificate of insurance that we made in order to provide to the third-party inspectors or the Maryland or MDE inspectors or also even insurance companies or owners if they're unsure what we're asking for. A lot of times these owners will have the full policy in front of them and they're just giving us pages here and there and they're not really sure what exactly we're asking for. Where when it comes to passing the financial responsibility for inspection purposes, we only require that we review the certificate of insurance or that endorsement and that it meets that wording and the owner and the facility addresses, all that. So this really helps them narrow down what we're looking for. This is an example of a tank schedule that we made that people can be looking out for, and we tell them we want to see that all that information matches what's in our database. So if an inspector is out there and they see a tank schedule that they're attaching to the inspection report and they notice that some of this information doesn't match what he found during his inspection, then that can be a step ahead of the game to get that corrected before we have to contact them and make that step. So as we are reviewing these documents, many times there's something wrong and that needs a little bit of outreach. So our new and renewal inspector applicants are required to attend an MDE inspector orientation every 2 years, which they will receive that MDE checklist again, and they'll receive any retraining on what to look for when submitting financial responsibility with the inspection report. And then also, if we do get one that's wrong and we want to address this with the insurance company or the owner of the tanks, we provide that example, as I said. And there's also the website, the Electronic Code of Federal Regulations. We provide them that link for specifically if it's whatever type of insurance they're using, we can provide them that and state this is what needs to be written in that to meet the requirements. We are also in the process of having our new regulations approved, and we do plan to require a notification if there's a change in ownership or the name of insured, or of a policy, or a cancellation. And then also we plan to require that they provide a detailed tank schedule when we receive those insurance policies to make sure that they are telling the insurance company exactly what they have and that it matches what we have in that database. So once those regulations do come out, we are going to be needing to do some more outreach to those insurance companies and owners. When it comes to the office versus field, so myself and the certification section, we are in office. We review all forms of the acceptable financial responsibility in the state of Maryland. The certification section will do an initial review when those FRs come in with the inspection report, and if it does not meet regulation, it's then assigned to an MDE field inspector to follow up. So usually the field inspectors won't get any sort of financial responsibility unless that's something that's already deficient in the inspection that we review. And so when the field inspectors get that financial responsibility document that's in failure, if it's insurance, they're trained now on what to look for, so they know what can pass and what cannot pass and what needs to be fixed in order to be correct. And if they're not sure, they can submit to me if they need approval. And then also, if they do get any other financial responsibility, like letters of credits or a self-insured test, they submit to me for review and approval. In Maryland, like in Delaware, we have basically, 79% is third-party insurance that's being used for financial responsibility. Self-insured is our next highest. And then our third highest is just not listed in our database. Those are for emergency generator tanks that are supplied by heating oil, or for a new facility or an upgraded facility that has not had that new inspection yet to trigger that data information. We have 2,745 total federally regulated facilities, and at the moment we have 198 that are in the fail status. Usually it's in the fail status for minor things. It's very rare that it'll be in the fail status for just not having financial responsibility. And we do have that not listed as well in the data, which is the same reasons. It's either not been inspected or it's an emergency generator that's supplied by heating oil. Here are some common issues that we find when we review these insurance policies or even any sort of financial responsibility. But one of the biggest ones is that wording does not match as required. There is an old version on some of these certificate of insurances that we're seeing that states, specifically in that paragraph 2B, it doesn't have the last part of it. There's a little bit of a and 280.104 through 280.107, that's not included in that. So we've been finding that's a big trigger. If we know whether to approve it or not, we look right there and we know whether it's the new version or the old version. We also have to look again to if the registered owner name does not match, we need to contact the owner and verify what the correct owner name is. And then depending on if we have it correct, then they need to make sure that their insurance policy is changed so that the name of the insured is the registered owner, or they need to provide an additional insured endorsement that states the registered owner. If we do not have the correct owner name, at that point they need to send in an amended registration form so that they can make sure that we have the correct owner name. Another thing that's wrong is the tank system information on the schedule might not match what we have registered. So we look at the detail. Whatever they have on there needs to match. So they may not have very much, but if they have just a year and it doesn't match, we're asking them to make sure they verify the correct date of install and that it matches. Multi-facility owners, sometimes they add a new station and we're given an older FR, or that FR has not been updated, or we're not provided that endorsement that indicated an addition of a facility to the policy. So that's usually an easy fix. There's usually a new certificate of insurance or endorsement, or sometimes there's an endorsement that states this has been added on this date, effective this date. Additionally, sometimes you'll see that not all tanks are included on the financial responsibility, and so we find out from the owner what the problem is. Sometimes it's involved in just being a compartment tank and they're not being consistent with those. That's one of the things I find with owners with a lot of compartment tanks and a lot of facilities. One facility will have a compartment tank and listed as one tank on the schedule, and then another facility owned by them will have a compartment tank that's listed as two tanks on the facility schedule, or on the tank schedule. So we have to make sure that they're being consistent on how they're defining that compartment tank and on that tank schedule. Another issue, which Eileen mentioned about, is the age of the tanks and the increase in premiums. Next, I'll talk about the enforcement action. If a facility does not have financial responsibility at all, we consider that a significant operation of compliance. And most likely, the first step with that is making a site visit, providing them notice, and usually it's a 4-day notice, that the owner must provide financial responsibility or they'll get a red tag delivery ban, and that makes it so that they can no longer get fuel delivered to them. Another method we can use for enforcement is a notice of violation, which includes a penalty, or if it's not addressed, eventually they are referred to the AG's office. If it's not a significant operation of compliance, meaning it might not meet the wording completely or the tank system information just might not match, we like to work with the owners on correcting deficiencies so it's a little less urgent and they don't need that red tag delivery ban immediately. But we can only wait for so long until enforcement action occurs, and if that does occur, generally we do a notice of non-compliance first, which is a letter that states what they're non-compliant in, what they need to do. There's not a penalty attached to that. And then next would be the notice of violation if we don't get a response with that non-compliance notice. And then again, the red tag delivery ban or referral to the AGs. The last thing I'll talk about is a policy review we've been doing. It's our response to the EPA's memo about voluntary exclusions and self-insured retentions. So we looked at EPA's list of known insurance providers for underground storage tank and owners and operators that was on their website. And we made a list of insurance companies, agents, and brokers that stated they serve Maryland or the United States. And then we mailed a notice to them that they need to submit their full policy for review. That's just the memo that was sent by the EPA. This is the letter that we sent out April 26, 2019, giving them until May 31st, which is a little over 30 days, to get that full policy to us. And our findings were actually most of the ones that we sent letters to from that EPA list came back to us undeliverable. There was about 25 that came back undeliverable. We had a lot of them contact us and state that they did not do business in Maryland. Some of the agents and brokers would contact us and state that they're not responsible or cannot change the wording. So our response to them was, whichever insurance companies you are dealing with, you need to ensure that their policy wording is as we're requiring. So the ones that we did get back and reviewed, most of them ended up requiring that they report a voluntary tank removal, but not exclude it. So they would state, you have 5 days. Please tell us 5 days before the removal that you're going to be doing it, so that then they have at least that reporting. But they in nowhere did they exclude those tank removals. And in the end, we received 9 full policies, and most met regulation. 8 out of 9 did meet the regulation. So our next steps related to this policy review is we're going to create a list of approved insurance companies that we did the full review on, so that we have that available to people to know what we consider as full coverage and good insurance companies. And during this process, and while I'm reviewing different certificate of insurances and endorsements, there are other companies out there that were not included on that list. So as we get those companies, we're going to send the letter out to them so that we can keep getting these full policies to review and ensure that they meet that requirement with the exclusion. And then any insurance company that we see that do not meet the requirements, we're going to work with them to see what can be revised and review for approval. So far, that's only been one that has not met the requirement. Any questions?
All right. Well, thanks so much, Melissa. And I did get a few questions, and I'm trying to sort through because I think some are really great questions to ask of you, but then also to the panel. So I think we can maybe table a few for the end because they're a little more general, and I did give everyone a heads up on that. But I think at least one here was sort of in response to your presentation. So the question is, at any point, have you experienced a claim denied due to incorrect name on policy or misspelling?
We have not, but I have not really gotten into that part of insurance. Usually I review that. I'm usually the first part of it. I haven't had any follow-up on whether it was denied or not.
Okay. And another question, are the reviews of the insurance documents being done by field staff during the inspections or by the compliance staff back in the office?
I believe, I'm an office person, so I know mostly what I do, and we do them. If it's insurance, we'll do them initially when we get those reports in, and then when they're given to the field staff, they probably are able to do a review of it and respond on site with their report of observations. But if not, they do send, they would review it fuller when they have a little bit more time and then provide a report of observations later stating this is incorrect, this is what you need to give me.
Okay, great. So I'm going to give it, let's give it 30 more seconds, and I'll ask the audience if there's any questions specific to Melissa's presentation about Maryland. I'll go ahead and take 25 seconds here. And again, I did get some good, more general ones, and I do want to save those. We can hear from all of our speakers at the end, because I do think we'll have a little bit of time after our final presentation. So give it another 15 seconds or so if there's any questions specific to Melissa's presentation. All right, so I'll hang on to those couple other ones. Now, I did send just a friendly suggestion to the audience. If you could hopefully send me your questions through the chat bar as opposed to Q&A. I know Q&A might be more intuitive, but I'm jumping around a bit and trying to keep track of a lot of great questions. So definitely continue to send me questions. If you can, please send them through the chat just so I can kind of monitor one thing instead of two. I do appreciate it, but keep them coming. Great questions, and some of you have gotten some in, and I'm tabling those towards for the end of the presentation. So, well, thanks so much, Melissa, for presenting. And,
thank you.
Yeah, thank you. We're going to go ahead and introduce our final speaker. I'm happy to welcome Kelly Adams. He's the manager of the Corrective Action Unit, Unit 1 at Georgia's Environmental Protection Division, the UST program. I'm going to go ahead and hand it off to Kelly. Take it away when you're ready, sir.
All right. So I appreciate everybody being on the line. I basically think I'm here for two different perspectives. If you get, I'm hoping you walk away with two different perspectives here. And one of them is the administration of financial responsibility, and one of those instruments is a trust fund. And to a lesser degree, how to administer financial responsibility when your program may be resource poor, like Georgia's is. So with that, let's dive in. Before I get too far into the details of financial responsibility, I wanted to provide some interesting facts about Georgia as it relates to financial responsibility. We're the third largest tank population in the country with 29,250 tanks, and that equates roughly to about 10,000 federally registered facilities. So quite a big program. This is a graph of all of our open releases over time. We're currently around 825. There was a peak of 4,300 open releases shortly after the 1998 upgrade requirements. And as I've alluded to already, we are a trust fund state. Our fund is, this slide says 60% of all open releases. I looked at the data just before this presentation. It's actually closer to 70%. 60 to 70% of all the open releases, the fund is responsible for cleaning up. Some other interesting facts is, despite having the third largest tank population, we have a very small program. We have 5 managers and roughly 40 full-time staff. We're kind of unique in the sense that our fund is voluntary, but it still remains solvent. It's very solvent today. In addition to the fund, the program accepts all FR mechanisms outlined in 40 CFR Subpart H. So basically the surety bonds, letters of credit, self-insurance, or financial tests, we accept all that. The fund has some unique requirements. Technically, there's a $10,000 deductible and it provides $1 million of coverage for corrective action and third-party liability. That includes bodily harm and property damage. As I said previously, we have about 10,000 active facilities. By far, most of them participate in our fund, the Gus Trust Fund, at 74%. Next up would be insurance, and lastly, self-insured. That other category, there's quite a few that don't have. There's some database issues or some rare instruments, and that they all kind of fall in that other category. The fundamental question is how do we do it? If we have such a large regulated community and our program is fairly small, limited resources, how are we doing that? And the answer to that question is, let's say we have some work to do. I'm just being quite candid. In the history of our program, financial responsibility just hasn't received the attention that it needs. We acknowledge that, and we're moving forward. But again, I wanted to summarize some of the challenges that we have. Basically, limited resources, the size of our universe, we've already talked about that. The $10,000 deductible poses kind of a headache for us because the way the state rules read is that $10,000 deductible has to be one of the CFR instruments outlined in CFR. The reality of that situation is that most of the tank owners just don't have that deductible financial responsibility instrument. So again, a major headache. Insurance policies typically they don't meet the minimum requirements or to some degree are non-existent. I don't think we have a lot of those, but there are some out there that claim they have insurance but just don't have them. We have some enforcement hurdles, unlike the other states that you've heard from. We're not a red tag state, so it's very difficult. Very difficult for us to implement fuel delivery prohibition. The normal enforcement process to impose a penalty is quite tedious. It takes some time. And then there's a possibility that we could tie eventually financial responsibility to annual tank registration. So basically, if you didn't have FR and we could verify that, you wouldn't get an operating certificate. We haven't done that. In this state, that would be a political uphill battle, but it's possible we can do that at a later date. In short, there's a high percentage of facilities that just don't have adequate financial responsibility. I know that sounds very dire, but I will land this presentation very hard on the fact there's a bigger picture here of how we administer financial assurance and how we manage the fund that basically it's a much better picture than what this slide presents. Getting back to just looking at FR, we do acknowledge it's an issue, and we feel like we're moving in the right direction. As the old adage says, is if the first step in solving a problem is admitting you have a problem, and we definitely admit there's a problem there. So far, what we've been able to do is we're despite our limited resources, we're saying, okay, we're going to split some of those resources and just dedicate it to financial responsibility. And we've actually established what I would consider a team at this point, a lead administrator who has shown a great interest in financial responsibility, and our inspection staff will make the second part of this team. The administrator's role, there's no way the single administrator is going to be able to handle the administration or management of FR of over 10,000 facilities. So additional resources will be added to her when the time is needed. Some other successes is there's some we've standardized all of our forms. They're easy to understand. We think that there will be a big hit for the regulated community. Don't know if Florida's on the line, but a great thank you to them for allowing. We basically borrowed their forms and tailored them, probably very similar to Delaware's as well. We've created an inspector training guide that will be rolled out soon, and we actually have a new manager coming on board, and we're kind of waiting for that new manager to come on board before we start doing the training. And we are doing outreach now about that we're taking financial responsibility more seriously, and for them to prepare, to have these instruments in place. moving forward, the administrator's role is basically the development of forms, SOPs, and checklists. They'll be doing some assistance with training. They'll be in charge of overall tracking and storage of these instruments. She will be kind of the backstop for more complex mechanisms as far as the review of those mechanisms. She will help out with coordinating outreach and the review of voluntary submissions. And what I mean by that is that the most of our deficiencies are going to lie with those GUS Trust Fund participants who don't have the FR instrument for the deductible. We have a good working relationship with our stakeholders and our regulated community. They're very supportive of our program, and we do think that they'll voluntarily comply. Many of them will once the word gets out there. I may be naive in thinking about that way, but I do think that we will have some success there. She will be a big part of her job will be getting them to submit those FR instruments for the deductible, and then she will act as the point of contact for most of the enforcement. Inspector's role, in the beginning, they're mainly going to be doing compliance assistance, getting the word out about the new requirements for FR. Before they even do the inspection, they're going to verify what's in the database and check it with the annual tank registration, and then physically look at the instrument and see if they all match. If not, they will update the database if necessary. They will do what amounts to a cursory review of existing mechanisms if they have them. These will be for the ones that are not participating in the trust fund, either insurance or surety bond or something along the lines of that. They will review some critical elements or a cursory review to make sure everything's there. Anything more complex will go to the administrator. They'll refer any issues again to the administrator, and actually there's a mistake there's an extra bullet. I apologize for that. And they will recommend, if it has an existing facility, recommend enforcement if they just can't get anywhere with a deficient instrument. I'm going to do a lot of detail here. This is basically what the inspectors will use as a checklist. There's going to be obviously some details in each one of those items that they'll look for. One thing that's missing from this slide is to participate in the trust fund, they will verify, they'll actually look at their fuel receipts to make sure that the fees are being paid into the fund. That's pretty much the only thing that's required to be in the fund, that and the deductible. Some outreach efforts that they're currently moving forward on. Again, the inspectors will be initially providing compliance assistance, just getting the word out there. We recently formed a stakeholder group for an unrelated issue, but we're going to use that as a great forum to educate them about the importance of FR. We're going to participate. We've always participated in expos and symposiums across the state. We will continue to do that. We are currently working on some informational pamphlets and letters to owners about the need for adequate FR. And one land hard here is that our goal basically is a general rollout with an eventual deadline and enforcement to follow. Again, we think a lot of this will voluntarily happen, but eventually we're just going to have to set a date and say you have to have this stuff in place, and we will pursue enforcement for those that just don't meet that deadline. So I really want to slow down a little bit on these last couple of slides. Is despite the dire picture that I may have painted in the previous slides, we are actually doing quite well as a program when it comes to protecting human health and the environment. Basically, I know there's states out there that probably have limited resources just like ours, and so I wanted to have some words of wisdom basically. And the first thing is to leverage your limited resources, and I think you can do that by creating simple forms to standardize the review, basically making that FR review more efficient. Again, I mentioned Florida. I hope somebody in Florida's online. We borrowed heavily from that state. Their forms, very user-friendly, very easy to understand. We plan on actually separating the financial responsibility enforcement process separate from the regular inspection enforcement process because we don't want to slow down the inspection process. We're already shortchanged on resources. Let's separate the FR enforcement completely out of that. Last thing I want to talk about is our fund. Is the way the rules are governing our fund. It's incredibly flexible, and so we want to make it easy for people to get back into the fund if their insurance policy is not good, or they have a bad surety bond or letter of credit or something like that. We want to make it easier to get back into the fund. Again, what I want to land hard on is the fund is the rules are very flexible, and the program is seriously committed to improving compliance rate in regards to the actual FR instrument. I think that the ultimate goal here is protecting human health and the environment, and I think that we would all agree that should be the ultimate goal. The last slide here is basically the flexibility aspects of how we use the fund to what we hope is to protect human health and the environment. Basically, what I want to get across here is that it's real easy to get into tunnel vision when it comes to things like FR about do they have it or they do not. Again, I want to emphasize is that if you have a fund and it's flexible, you might be able to overcome challenges with limited resources and the strict nature of FR if you have that flexibility in the rules. The first two have been incredibly successful for our program. We can actually deduct $10,000, the deductible, from the first payment back to the owner-operator. That has been hugely successful. Basically, people will step up and do a cleanup when there's been a release, and the $10,000 deductible basically is automatically deducted from that first payment, so there's no haggling over who's responsible, and we don't have to do this drawn-out, tedious enforcement process. The other aspect about the fund that's incredibly flexible is we can actually just move forward with the cleanup and worry about the deductible later using cost recovery. We haven't done that a lot over the history of the program, but we do expect to be doing that more and more very, very soon, actually. Our fund is so solvent that we can actually pull more sites, more cleanups from the backlog, and what's holding us up basically is a recalcitrant owner or the deductible technically, and so we're just going to move forward and worry about that deductible later. Last thing I want to mention, we haven't done this a lot, we've done this sparingly, but our fund can actually be used for emergency situations even if the responsible party is not a fund participant. Again, sparingly we've had to do this, but our rules are so flexible that we could even use the fund for non-participants. That's basically all that I have, I believe, and are there any questions?
All right, fantastic. Thanks so much, Kelly. I did get a couple questions specific to you. I guess first we had a shout out back to you from Florida. Someone says you are very welcome, and
okay.
They be sure to share back anything you develop, things like check sheets, etc.
Absolutely.
So I got a question about the Georgia Fund. So the question is, does the Georgia Fund meet the $2 million annual aggregate where required?
Yes, it does. I did not go into that, but it does.
Okay, great. So I did get a couple, again, some questions that I do want to kind of reserve for the end here because I think they're more general and maybe we'd like to hear from each presenter on those questions. But again, I'll open it up for, let's give it 45 seconds or so. And if anyone has a question specific for Kelly or for the Georgia UST program, definitely send it my way to the chat function right now. Thanks. I got another thank you for Georgia. Someone says they borrowed the Georgia form for their standby trust, and they say thank you for that. So, all right, got a love fest going on here, but another thank you to Kelly. Any other questions for Kelly's presentation before we do a little roundtable? I think I'm kind of surprising our panel. I know we didn't really discuss a roundtable, but I think that's the direction these really good questions are taking us. So, in a minute here, I think we'll unmute all of you and maybe just walk through some of these questions. But I want to give it another 20 seconds or so. Any questions or maybe compliments for Kelly on his presentation? All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to see if I can just quickly upload. I've been documenting these questions. I think it might be a better way to do this. So just bear with me 1 second. All right, so let me go ahead and take those controls back. And like I said, I realize some of you out there might have been asking these questions specifically about one of the presentations, but wasn't quite sure, and I figured, why not just ask the panel. So panelists, if you don't mind, go ahead and just clicking your microphones back on. And I want to kind of just walk through these, and if you've got an answer for it, great. If not, no worries on that. But we'll just do a bit of a roundtable. So. Are you all seeing the questions on your screen?
Yes.
Okay,
yes.
Just one right now, and they'll kind of, we'll unpack them as we go forward. So I'll just read it aloud. I know everyone can see it, but the first question for the panel here, I often see on the policy that tank compartments are listed as separate tanks. Has anyone seen this as being a problem in getting coverage after a release? I always worry the insurance will claim the information reported was not correct. I guess we can just go in the order of presentation, so we can go Eileen, Melissa, Kelly, if that's all right with you all.
Yep.
Any answers out there from the panel?
I haven't seen anything like that in Delaware. David, have you?
It would still be on the schedule. On the Schedule R, it would still list the components. I guess where the release came from would need to be determined, but that would be the product. I mean, it shouldn't be. I don't see how it would be a problem, but I'm interested in hearing how the other panel responds.
Okay, great. Melissa?
Well, like I said before, for whatever reason, I don't really know what happens after I review these insurance policies. So nothing really gets back to me on, this owner had a policy, but it ended up being denied. Their claim ended up being denied for whatever reason. But I said in the presentation, when we do get them with compartment tanks, and if it's not consistent, especially if it's a multi-facility owner, we like to make it clear where they're going with this. So if they're listing their compartment tanks as one tank, we want to make sure that's consistent, or if it's two tanks, to make sure that's consistent.
Great.
In Georgia, I think we haven't really seen this too much. I think I'm always looking at things big picture, and most of the releases that we have that are being covered by insurance, the responsible party, the tank owner, could probably pass the financial test. And so if there is a problem with their insurance policy, then we'll usually just go ahead and move forward with the cleanup. We've had a couple instances in general issues with insurance policies where they're not going to pay up, and the program takes a pretty hard-line approach about reviewing the policy and pointing out the errors in their ways. And so we've had some success actually talking to insurance companies and doing the work.
Great. Thank you all. I know these are just firing off, putting you on the spot, so appreciate you thinking on these questions. So the second one, have you dealt with a situation or a site where historic contamination that occurred prior to the effective date of the insurance company and the current owner cannot pay for cleanup? So if the owner is ultimately responsible but can't afford to do so, what happens?
That's a good question. I mean, a lot of times it comes back to us, to the state,
right.
and we end up paying for it out of state funds. But obviously we try to exhaust every other route to get the funding, but that's how it would go. It would ultimately fall on the state to do the cleanup.
State project, yeah. Yep.
I'm unsure. I can try to get the answer, but I don't know at this time.
In Georgia, we typically have not seen this too much. The good thing is if it was a fund, if it's currently participating in the fund, we'd probably not dive into the details too much and just use the fund to clean it up.
Right. Another question here, and I think this one came up earlier for Melissa, but for the rest of the panel, have you experienced a claim denied due to incorrect name on the policy or a misspelling?
A lot of times I would say no to that, and I think David would too. But a lot of times we don't get involved in with regards to the owner and the insurance company. So if there's a cleanup going on and it's getting paid for and we're not paying for it, we're not inquiring as to how it's getting paid.
So the answer to that would be no.
I'm going to say I've never experienced it, but I'm with them. Not really involved with that part of it. We check to make sure that it matches. So hopefully at least we can eliminate that happening, but not sure.
So in Georgia, my limited experience with the insurance company is that this would not happen. I can't imagine that they would actually deny a claim based on the spelling. It's usually for something else bigger than that, some poorly worded exclusion or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great, thank you. Just kind of circling back, I got a follow-up clarification. So on the second question here about contamination that occurred prior, I guess the questioner is wondering if you could speak more on sort of the insurance company's position. Do they claim that it's not, quote, they're saying that it's not our dirt? I don't know if you can expound upon what you said, or if there's more to say about the perspective of the insurance company in that situation.
I don't have any experience with it, so I can't really speak to it directly.
Nor do I.
Anything else from anyone?
Yeah, I wish I could offer something there. I don't think that we've seen that specific situation in Georgia.
Okay. And yeah, just a reminder to all these questions, it can be a little challenging to facilitate maybe, what we're really getting at in our questions. So I definitely encourage all of you, if we didn't get to it today, shoot me an email, give me a call, or we'll definitely post those emails for our panel, again, toward the end here. So thanks so much for the questions. We do have a few more here. So someone just noted their own program. They have an online UST registry for the public to access, the owner-operator information, tank and release info, FR information. Wondering does your state have something similar to that?
Yes, we do. We have a Delaware Environmental Navigator that it has different links to, different areas of our tanks, but it would have all of the information that's listed on there. And as well as they can FOIA the file if they want specific details, but it can all be found online. Current investigations, current remediations, all of that can be found through our Delaware Environmental Navigator.
We have something too. We have our registration online for people to see what the most current information that's been registered with us is in a form of a facility summary sheet.
I'm very envious of Delaware and Maryland. We do not have that in Georgia, but what we do have is we provide a lot of that information on our webpage. We pull that information using queries from our database and provide it on our website for people to be able to download.
Great. All right, let's see here. I think we have another one. Yeah. This might have been specific to one of the presentations. I'm not sure when I pulled out of the questions here, but the question, is the inspector reviewing the policy every 3 years during the inspection?
Okay, so David's standing right here. He's the inspector, but I'll tell you that they look at the Form R and the Form D. The fact that we're now requesting the policy is brand new, and that will be done on a yearly basis when the policy renews. So that it will not be every 3 years; it'll be annual.
And that'll be designated to the field inspector, the compliance inspector will review the D and R, the forms D and Schedule R, and then we'll have a separate person that will also review the entire policy that's going to be assigned for that.
With Maryland, it is that we review the required wording per 40 CFR every 3 years as those inspections come in, and right now I'm doing that policy review, but there hasn't been anything decided on how frequent that policy review will be of the full policy.
So in Georgia, I think the best way to answer that question is that it's probably not happening every 3 years. We do it as it comes in, and so it's a voluntary submission at this time, but moving forward, I think that we'll start requiring it every year and looking at it every year. especially like as someone else said, that, you know, they're required to be renewed annually, usually.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. Well, audience, we still have some time, so definitely continue to send questions. That's kind of it as far as what I'm going to post, you know, up on the slides here for you to see, just because I was able to load those up during the end of Kelly's presentation. So I'm gonna read off what I have here. I know it's a little more challenging that way for the panel, but let's circle back to the second question again. So one of the questions again about the second bullet point here. The question is, would the site be eligible for brownfield program?
That's interesting.
Yeah, you have to discuss that with the brownfield site.
No, we actually we're amending our state law for underground storage tanks to provide liability coverage for people that want to go into the brownfield program specifically. However, if there was any type of enforcement activity on a site, it could not then go into the brownfield program. So if the person or entity that owns the facility can't pay for the cleanup and they're a responsible party, if there's any type of order against them, they're not going to be able to get into the brownfields program. And quite ultimately, what might happen is that, you know, as Dave said, the state would have to pay out of its money any kind of cleanup costs, and then maybe go back and put a lien on the property or some other way try to recoup the cost for cleanup. But we would not help them get into the brownfield program because of that. However, that said, we do often try to help people get into the brownfield program with underground, you know, with previous underground storage tank facilities.
Unfortunately, I can't answer that question. I don't have any knowledge on it.
And so in Georgia, I think the way we would go here is if it absolutely wasn't moving, you know, the insurance company wasn't willing to fund the cleanup, and our gust fund could not kick in, it would basically sit on a list until, unless it was an emergency, you know, we would get involved at that point. But basically, if it's just sitting on a list, eventually, you know, I think economic plays in a role here, and somebody would want to develop that property. I can't imagine this would be the situation would hold that up as long as they apply and meet the minimum requirements of the brownfields group. Then I think that it would move forward. I don't want to speak on behalf of the brownfield group, but I don't see this being an issue if they wanted to pursue it that way.
All right, thank you. Another one here. In your state, are you seeing older tanks being taken out of the ground because insurance costs are just too high?
Not yet. We're expecting it to happen soon, but right now policies are still being renewed, and the costs haven't gone up too much for them to not renew the policies as of right now. We're not seeing that at all.
We haven't seen too much of that either. We do have a couple newer, or I don't know if they're new insurance companies, but new to us that have been approved that I believe help with that problem in the premium sense.
We have not seen that either here. I have a suspicion what will happen is that when we start taking a closer look at these insurance policies, people are going to want to get back into the fund before they'd ever remove a tank.
All right, great. Well, let's see. I'm going to give it just a minute or so here to see if anyone's maybe been sitting on a question. You just want to fire it off through the chat function. And any final questions out there for the panel to field? Looks like a couple of folks are starting to sign off, so we might have gotten there already. But definitely send me any final questions you're sitting on, and we'll see if we can field them. And again, just a reminder, if it's, you know, if you want to have a follow-up conversation, whether it's with me or the panel, I'll make sure to, you know, provide their contact info here in a bit if it's, you know, more fitting for that. All right, so I'm not seeing anything else come in, but thank you so much to the audience. Really, these trainings are they are different and they're through webinar settings. So I really appreciate you all being interactive. I'm sure speaking on behalf of the panel, but I'm sure they like to get the questions rather than just to deliver the slides. So on that, I do just want to start with or wrap rather with a big thank you to all four of you, Eileen, David, Melissa, Kelly. Thanks so much for preparing and putting on an awesome training today. Clearly, it hit home with a lot of folks. We got quite a few good questions, and thanks for letting me kind of put you all on the spot there at the end. I'm sure the audience